All right. Welcome, everyone. So I was a soccer and state track meet mom this weekend. So my voice, I sound like a man. So I am drinking my tea. So if you see me drinking a lot, it's so that I have my voice back for this conversation that we're so excited to have. And then I quickly just realized I just grabbed a mug. And this is what my mug says. Wake up, kick ass, be kind, and repeat. So let's just have that be the theme for our little talk today. Seems appropriate. So first off, I just want to thank everybody for being on here, everyone who's going to listen to this later, because we are recording it. This was a great idea by the team to say, what if we put something together for people? We're so excited for the book to launch. As if any of you have written books, it's 2 years of your life you can't get back, but it takes a long time to get it to the finish line. And so it's why it's such an exciting thing for authors when they get it there, is because there's a lot of work behind the scenes that nobody sees to get the book out to everyone. And so we thought the people that are pre-ordering it, let's give them something special. Let's give them a little bit of insight into the book before you actually physically get it, so that you've got that before everybody else does. And so that's really what today is, to thank you guys, to be able to engage in dialogue with you, to be able to share a lot about what went into the book, why, and how it's organized. And we're going to share even some of the tools and those types of things with you guys early. And so we're also going to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So even during, so we're going to be monitoring the chat because we're making this real casual. So we'll be monitoring the chat throughout. If there is something we're talking about and you want to ask a question, please just go ahead and pop it in there and we'll catch it throughout our dialogue. Otherwise, we'll leave plenty of time at the end as well. So that's how this is going to roll. So what I wanted to start with is, I guess, my history and the story around the book, and then I'll have Chelsey add as well as a contributor, because she was a huge part of this book and the stories and the examples and just what is our stance on this aspect, and what do we want to be out there in the world when we think about culture and what we want to be known for in that space. And the foundation of this book started, I would say, in 2018. This has not been something that's been on my list that I want to write a culture book. It really started with the impact model that we created as part of the business. And so the impact model is throughout the book. You can find it on our website. We give it away, as we say. But the purpose of that impact model was that we were working with clients who had amazing strategies. They had amazing businesses with products and services. And we started to see the limiting behaviors of they couldn't achieve their strategy. And it was for a lot of different reasons. But we started to realize that there was something missing in the dialogue with our clients. We couldn't just help them with strategy. We had to pull in all of these other cultural and leadership aspects that we were seeing. And so in 2018, literally, it feels like on the back of a napkin, I designed a model that I could use to start talking to clients, average business leaders that didn't have HR and organizational effectiveness backgrounds, to start to help them understand why culture was something they needed to care about. Even if culture was not in their accountabilities, right? It wasn't in their job role. It really was in all of their roles. And then fast forward to the pandemic, right? And everybody trying to figure out, how do you manage remote cultures now? How do we maintain that? And at that time, right, we were in the perfect position with a model to say, this is how you need to start having conversations. You need to understand where you're strong and you're weak in this. And I think it was really during the pandemic that Chelsey and I both looked at each other and said, we have to get this out to more people, right? Because everybody we talked to about it, they were like, we need this. And this is a great way to talk to our teams. And I wish we had more information when it isn't Chelsey and I in front of them. And so that's where the book really started, is we started to have conversations to say, what if we wrote a book? What would we want it to be like? It's not just about the model, but what would we want to share? And so in August of 2021, we started down that path. We made the commitment both financially and from a time standpoint to say, we're going to do this, and we're going to figure out how to write a culture book, right? What do we want to say? And it's an understatement to say we're passionate about culture, because we see it every day in the clients we work with and the value that it can provide to business results. And our goal with the book is to simplify culture, right? And I don't mean that to diminish anybody's experience. I mean it to, this has to be something that an HR leader can hand to their executive and say, this is the kind of stuff we've been talking about, right? This is what we're missing as an organization. And that executive needs to be able to read it, and it's not all theory. And it's not all HR jargon, right? It's things that they care about. And so that was always our goal, is to tie it back and to simplify it as much as possible, because when things are simple, people will take action. They'll do something. right? When it's complicated, we have an excuse and we stand back and we just let it be the way it was. And so that's our goal. Chelsey, what else would you talk about just in your story around the book?
Yeah, so I've always been the culture guru in the organizations that I've been in because I believe so heavily in people and specifically leaders in organizations and that they're going to make or break the company. And my background is in human resources, but I always viewed myself as a non-traditional HR leader. And I was really focused from the day I set foot in my previous organization of how do we create community? How do we create connections? How do we bring the people together? I was in a company that had 18 different locations. And so bringing together and creating culture and an environment like that is very difficult. We had a great culture and we worked really hard at it. And then we had transitions in CEOs. And the new CEO came in from the outside and just really drove our culture into the ground. It was a completely different focus, really dialed in on results and changing everything in the organization without having any sort of buy-in of the direction that we were going. There was no alignment. There was a lot of silos that were created in the organization. And so when we finally got rid of him and then promoted someone from inside, it was just this culture revival. And so I call myself a culture revivalist because we really had to do that. We had to revive the whole culture of the organization. And it started as you look at our impact model, it started with the leaders and it started with trust. And that's what we had to build up, and it took 3 years to do. So that is my kind of passion story around culture. And I saw what it did to the organization and how we got through that, all the work that went into it. It's just that real life example and understanding of what it takes. And not every culture is the same, and you have to approach every culture as a unique entity, but it really just helps set the stage to come in and help Jaime write this book and help our clients. And then now hopefully helping all kinds of other people that we might never even talk to or ever know through the book. Like Jaime said, is really our intent is to get this out to the masses, because we know that it's great to have your business strategy and that's absolutely necessary, but you also have to make sure you have a people strategy and a culture strategy that's connecting those two together. And that's really what's going to drive your organization forward for the long term and not just a short-term fix. So that's kind of our backgrounds with our passion around this and writing this book. And it's been a really fun experience. Like Jaime said, 2 years in the making, which is crazy. But Jaime, do you want to talk about why did we end up calling this The Culture Climb? What is behind the title of the book and what our main intent is with this?
Yeah, we get asked that a lot. And so it actually came from, I don't even remember when, Chelsey, but when we were designing the impact model, we were talking about how are we going to talk about this with clients, right? Talk about it with leaders. And we started talking about, we feel like we're guides, right? We're not consultants, we're guides along this journey. And then we started talking about mountains and so we came up with all of these tools and these words actually before the name of the book, right? So you talk about a map. We have one of our tools is the culture map, right? And those types of things. And so we really aligned them to that type of stuff. And so the culture climb was really about watching the work we were doing before we had the book, right? Using the model with our clients. And I would equate it to, they knew where they wanted to go. We helped them, right? Set that destination. And it took a lot of sweat and a lot of work to get there. And so the culture climb is about, this isn't just pop a pill, read a book, some easy, simple fix. And we're very transparent about that with our clients and in the book, is that there's some sweat, right? That's going to be needed to be able to truly do this and not just say you're doing it, checking the boxes. And so the idea of culture is a mountain, right? You need to climb and you should want to climb because it's the right one. Because when we get to that new level, we have a different view. And then there's probably another mountain that we need to climb back behind that one, right? But we're just trying to really share that there's a lot of work to be done. This is not for the faint of heart, and it's not something that's going to be done in 1 quarter, right? It's, as we said, it's a longer journey. Most of our clients, it's 3 years plus, but they're starting to see the impacts right away.
And I think it's also just the continuous focus on culture. I think a lot of times we want to just get to the finish line. What do I need to do to be done with this? And what we're trying to get across throughout this book is you're sorry, but you're never done. You're never
Right.
checked done, got culture figured out, let's move on. It's
Yeah.
something that is continuously evolving and changing. And so that thought process of it's a climb, it's a journey, and it's always going to be evolving, it's always going to be changing. And if we're not staying focused on it as we grow as an organization, then it's going to fall by the wayside. And then you're going to have a lot more work to do than if you keep up that maintenance as you go along.
And I want to share a story here real quick, Chelsey, that I think is so simple, but so profound in that there was a large general contractor that we were working with, and they've been great clients for 3+ years. Right. And I talk about their head of field ops, the guy that I love him to death, but right, has the hard hat in his car and would come into all day strategy sessions wearing the yellow vest. Like it was just part of who he was. It didn't even take it off. And right, we were working with them and doing all this great strategy work, and they were a great company and they were growing, but they knew there was something missing. And I remember one annual planning session where the head of field ops, which was typically the guy that was like, why do I need to sit in these sessions for 8 hours? Like, why are we doing this? Like, I should be out in the field. And he came in and he said, if we do nothing else in our annual planning over these next 2 days that we're together, we need to help figure out a plan to help our guys in the field with their mental health. And this was during the pandemic, as the pandemic was just stretching on. Construction was necessary. They were open the entire time, right? There was no reprieve. And I just remember sitting in that room and looking at him, in over 3 years, seeing the complete transformation of him as a leader that I don't even think he recognized. But I was super proud because he had been resistant, right? He maybe didn't want to be there all the time when we were having meetings, but he was hearing what we were talking about. And he was seeing the value of a model like this. And that really means something, because we've got a lot of leaders that have hundreds and sometimes thousands of people, right, underneath their part of the organization that don't have that space to grow as a leader. And that was the really important piece for us. And we talk about it a lot in the book, is culture is the leader's choice. It's not HR's problem to solve. It's each of us gets to decide within our team, no matter how big or small that team is, what kind of culture we want to create. And I just think it really exemplifies that we're a strategy firm that has a purpose to create organizational impact at the human level, right? So the impact is not about writing a fancier strategic plan. The impact is about how do we get people rallied around that plan? And that's really the difference that we're trying to make with this book.
And one of the things that people always say, how do you define culture? It's so nebulous. There's so many different components to it. What is it? And how do you define it? And where do you start? And that was one of our intents with this book, is to simplify it and to help create a very digestible definition of culture.
And while we're talking about this, you've mentioned this being a super nebulous thing. And back to our purpose of writing this book and keeping it simple, where it can be simple, is we don't want people to put all of their energy, and organizations to put all of their energy into talking about culture. We want them to put the energy into the doing. And so instead of making it complicated, let's make the discussion simple and the action the hard part, right? The things we need to do, but let's save our energy for the things that actually we need, right, to spend that energy on. But we also get asked a lot, so how do I know if I have a good culture? How do you define a positive culture? What does that mean? And we also try to simplify that to say a positive culture is a place where people leave every day better than when they came in. It's as simple as that. And that could mean someone saw them today. Someone actually recognized them or took the time, right, to have a conversation with them. It could be someone helped them solve a problem. It could be they got a job promotion, right? It can be as big or as small as you want it to be. But are we paying attention to how people are coming in and how people are leaving every day, and whether or not as leaders, we are filling their buckets or are we draining it? And as someone who was in a corporate role for many years, like there were a lot of days where I left with nothing left for my family, meaning no energy, anything. And you're seeing this, especially in Western cultures. You don't see it as much in kind of outside of the United States, but very much Western cultures it's the work to the death kind of approach. And we might be bringing people in with great positivity. They had a great morning, or they sent their kids off to school in a great way, or a great weekend. And we drain them all day long and send them back to their families that way. And so I do think it's a leader's responsibility, whether your team is 2 or 200 or 2,000, to make sure you're preparing the people underneath you. How are we treating people when they're here? And are we making sure they're going home in the right way?
Yeah, and if you haven't yet, if you go into the chat, there's the PDF in there, the impact maturity model. And I encourage you to go in and open that up so you can see the impact model, which is what we want to touch on here just briefly, because this is what the whole entire book is written around. Like Jamie said, she did V1, version 1 of this model. And as we worked with more clients, we did assessments, we did surveys, and literally as we wrote the book, we were refining this and editing it and tweaking it to make it what it is today. So it's been an evolution for sure, but it is the key. It's the backbone to this whole entire book. And it's the backbone to how we approach clients, how we approach strategy, how we approach culture development, how we approach leadership development. And like Jamie was saying, what goes across the whole bottom of that model is conscious leadership. And that is very intentional. At one point, that was a building block within the model. And as we were working with clients, we're like, oh my gosh, like we knew that leadership was important, but it is it. And if we don't have strong leaders, we will not have a strong culture. And I talk a lot about the John Maxwell law from the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership called the Law of the Lid, which states that your leaders are the lid of your organization. So if you rate your leaders on a scale of 1 to 10, a 6, then their team and your company will never be able to rise above them. But if you can level up your leaders, you can level up your culture, you can level up your business. And so that's our philosophy behind the leadership piece of it. Jamie, do you want to talk just the foundational aspects quickly?
Yeah, and the way the model is built, and again, there has been many iterations, but it's the foundational aspects. It doesn't matter what business you're in, right? What kind of product or service, that those are things that all humans need in order to thrive, right? We've got to have clarity. We've got to have something that's inspiring us, right? And something that tells us, so your purpose, and then something that tells us, here's how I need to show up to be successful in this environment, whatever that environment is. We need to have deep levels of trust, right? Because nothing gets done unless we trust each other and we can get through hard times together. So when you're building that trust, I was speaking at an event on Friday, and I said, you can't build trust during tough times. You can add to trust, but trust needs to be built during good times so you can lean on it when you need it. We can't wait until that. And that's what we see a lot of organizations is we're doing really right now, right? Our foundation is strong, but you're doing well from a growth and a revenue and right, all those other financial targets that you might be measuring. But are you measuring the other parts? Because what are you leaving on the table? So as a true business strategist, my response to a client or a prospect that says, I think our culture is fine, right? Is how do you know? Are you measuring those things? And I think that's another aspect of this model that is we purposely built it so that we could build measurables around every aspect of it, because it's nearly impossible to measure culture, right? At this big nebulous, but when you break it down into the building blocks that we have in this model, you can measure those things. And it's helped our clients take their scorecards and go way beyond financials, right? And go way beyond just the things that they think they're supposed to measure. And they're starting to look at other things, and they're starting to see the cause and effect of the work that they do and how it affects the human element in some of those measurables. Turnover. We have clients that we've been working with, and we're not going to name any client names on here, that they're not having any problems finding people. They have people walking in their front door with resumes saying, if you ever have an opening, I'd love to know about it. Driving to their facility. And like the companies that say we can't find anybody, we just tell them to call some of our clients, because when you have your culture right and your culture showing up online and you're following this model, it can have a huge impact on so many different aspects of your business.
And do you want to specifically touch on purpose? Because I think this is so important. You touch on our purpose, which is to drive organizational impact at the human level. But I think we also have some great clients that have really meaningful purposes and just what they are and how they utilize them.
Yeah. And you're here, this is a buzzword right now, purpose, right? A lot of people, it's always been important, but people are talking about it. And it's because we have generational shifts happening, that we have younger employees and people that are coming to work for our companies that are requiring it. Does your company have a soul, is how we describe it, right? More than just, do you make money and you even can do great things, but does it have a soul and a reason for being that's beyond making money, right? It's beyond winning or beating the competition. And we've got some amazing stories. One that comes to mind, Chelsey, when you ask, is we have a highway heavy client. So for anybody in the construction industry, they're repaving Interstate 94, right? Really big interstate paving. They do guardrails, like those types of things. So they're laborers, right? Very blue collar industry. And one of our clients, we were working through this purpose piece, and the owner of the company knew what his purpose was, right? He was typically the owners do, right? Because they started the business for a reason. And he said, but I don't, because I was encouraging him to share that, right? And talk to his team in their quarterly conversations. And he said, I don't know, we've got laborers that are shoveling blacktop. I don't think they probably care about this kind of stuff. And I said, just try it. I'm just curious. When you get your team together next, bring it up. And he shared it with the team. And he called me and said, you have no idea what just happened. He said, one of my lowest level laborers, because they actually have skilled and what skill you're at, he said, raised his hand after I shared our purpose and said, when I'm driving down 94 with my kids, I point out that I put that piece of guardrail in and it's going to save someone's life. And the owner was like gaping mouth, like I had no idea that he cared, right? I thought he just was here for a paycheck. And what he started to realize is that as a human, you are wired for this type of stuff. It doesn't matter what you do and what your education is or how fancy of a job you have. You're wired for purpose, and to believe that what you're doing personally or professionally makes a difference, right? And so I think we sometimes don't give our employees enough credit that they do care about it. And as leaders, they think, wow, that's our job and we need to think about it. When really, to go from Sunday night to Monday morning, like Chelsey said, like Monday morning I feel like there's work we need to do. And I have a huge part in that, of us being successful. Can I share one more?
Yeah, go ahead.
That's a story share. And we have so many amazing stories. I just thought of another one. So we have a biomedical startup, and this has been a couple years now. So biomedical startup, they were creating a heart chamber for people that have this heart issue, and 200,000 people a year die from this condition. And so they were developing this heart chamber that was going to save these lives. And they were 5 years in, pre-revenue. So in the biomedical world, that's very typical, 140 employees and valued at $1 billion. And they hadn't made a dime. And they had failed. So to go through a clinical trial, it's 18 months from start to finish on average. So it means you develop it, they do a clinical trial, there's all these hoops you have to jump through. And if one small thing goes wrong, right, with one patient, you can fail a clinical trial. And so they were on their third clinical trial, and we were working with them, and they failed their third clinical trial. And I remember it was the week later, and we were in there having leadership meetings. And we were talking about this, and they said, how do we get these people to keep coming in every day? When you've been through 3 clinical trials, 18 months, and you're back to the finish line, or you're back to the starting line when you thought you were almost to the finish line. And we had this long discussion, and they said, these people are here because of our purpose, not because of maybe how much we pay them, not because of how much we make as an organization. They're here because if we don't solve this, 200,000 people are going to die next year that maybe we could have saved their lives. And that's a really big purpose. But at the same time, like so many organizations have this and they just haven't tapped into it, right? It's literally an untapped resource to keep your people going. And that's why we're such huge advocates of it, because we have extreme examples on either end of blue collar and medical and all of these different areas. So I just think our job with this book was to share some of those stories and to share the impact as leaders, that we don't have to be that disconnected, right, from what is the soul of the company.
Well, you talked about being a storyteller, and that was one of our intents with the book, is to share as many real life stories as we could think of to help people try to find themselves in some of those stories. So like, oh yeah, maybe we don't create some amazing medical device, right, but there are other companies like us that are accounting firms or engineering firms or construction firms or manufacturing or whatever it is, that have really meaningful purposes and really strong core values and a great culture statement and all these other things that we talk about, because every company has a purpose. And again, this goes back to leadership. We just need our leadership team to really figure that out and then share it and communicate it and operationalize it within the organization, which again is easier said than done. But that's part of what we're trying to get across in this book is how do you do that? How have other organizations done that and creating that map to help you be successful?
More data from the book from Harvard Business Review. An inspiring culture gets you 125% more productivity. So they did the stat, right? And so what I talk to leaders about is if you don't know what your culture is, if you're not measuring it and paying attention to it, you could be burning piles of cash every day. And I don't mean to be, right, but you don't know what you're not achieving. You can still be a great company, right, and be achieving from a financial standpoint, but the productivity and running leaner, right? If we can't find people, can we motivate the people we have, right, and work with what we have? There's so many other factors that we have to be considering that I think is a great example of what you're going to see, Matt, is that you just continue to go deeper in this, right? And it can only get better from there in terms of your business results. So that's a really important point.
And I think Jamie would be great. Obviously, we're not going to share a specific client, but a client that we've worked with, we've done our impact assessment with now 3 years in a row. And I know, Jamie, if you want to, they were your client originally. So if you want to touch on how do we even get to this point? Why? Because it goes back to your point of how do you know? Like you think your culture is good, but how do you know?
And so, yeah, this is a client, we're probably over 5 years in at this point. And when they started, it was a family-owned business, right? So a lot of family members involved. Today, one family member is involved in the business. So they've gone through significant change on that side. That's been good, but hard. And they had a leadership team that did not have a growth mindset, right? Which is a huge part of what their culture was that they didn't want it to be. And they didn't have a way to really be able to look and say, here's how it's affecting our business results, because financially they were a good company, right? They had grown for 40 years and they had made money but they started to realize that it wasn't, people weren't staying. They looked at all of these other metrics. And over the 3 years they were actually the first ones when I developed the model, when it was in like scratch sheet of paper, I had the conversation with them and they're like, this is how we need to be thinking. And they were our very first client to say, do your whole process on us. We'll do it because we know we have a gap. And over the 3 years that they've done this, our full assessment process, it brings me to tears actually. And Chelsey's now really driving the culture piece for them. But we visually can show you like the heat map of where they were rated when we started and where they're rated now. And they have manufacturing employees that are taking these surveys. This is a typically 80%, 70 to 80% turnover level of role, because that's just what the industry numbers are. And they now are yellows and greens in all of their cultural aspects from the manufacturing floor. And that's unheard of, right? In any of the studies that you read. And it's because they've done the work. They've committed to doing the work and they knew it was a 3 to 5 year journey that they were on. And they didn't let a bad quarter or a year that we don't know if it's going to finish as high as we want. So let's cut our culture funding and our culture approach. They stayed with it.
And not only, so what we do is we take that impact model that you guys pulled up the PDF of and we'll heat map it, red, yellow, green for each one of those building blocks. So not only have they gone from having a lot of red building blocks to having 0 red building blocks, we also broke it out by department. And so we were able to look at just the floor employees and there's no red building blocks in there either. And they have just had such success. And then also from a business standpoint, they're more than doubling their revenue this year than they did 3 years ago when we first started doing this study. So they have just, I mean, they focused on leadership growth and development a ton. I was just there last week doing another leadership workshop with their leaders. They focused on trust a lot with the executive leadership team because Jamie said there'd been a lot of family members in there, a lot of turnover that happened. And so they really had to build up that trust. Communication was the other thing they focused on tremendously. And so those are all foundational elements of culture. They focused on those and it fixed so many other building blocks within the impact model that they didn't have to specifically focus on all of these building blocks to see them level up. They had to focus on the things that really matter, like their leaders, like communication and trust. So it was so fun for us to be able to see that progression over the last 3 years, and they're still focused on it. They're not stopping now. They're going to keep going and they're just focusing on different things. And so it's been really inspiring for us to be a part of that and just see it transform and see the leaders and specifically the top leaders invested in this and believing in this and supporting it as we go.
And Chelsey, I haven't even told you, but I had a big realization with their leader, the top leader, a couple weeks ago, where he said, I have more time than I know what to do with. And he said, it's really actually awkward. Like he called me because we wanted to talk about how awkward it was. Because I used to put out 100 fires a day and I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. And so he said, now I'm just spending time with my leaders and making them better. And it was just this realization of all of those books you read about companies that have done this right, that you're like, whatever, like that doesn't actually happen. It's a some story that doesn't actually happen. I'm living it. I'm a different leader. I'm a different human. I have more balance than I've ever had in my life, like at home, because our business isn't chaos. And that kind of stuff it's exactly why we do what we do. But it took them 3 years and pretty decent investment. The business results are there, right? Their leaders are not burnt out. Their leaders aren't leaving. And so it's just telling these stories this is what we want to get out. And this is why we also need all of you to be evangelists of this. It's why we give it away in the book. We want everybody go buy this and give it to somebody else that was in an organization that needs to hear this. This was our way of spreading some of these stories and sharing these successes, because we now know it can be different and it can be better.
Yeah. So we've been pretty high level. I want to dig into the book a little bit here to help you understand what to expect and how to read it and what to get out of it. And as we go, like James said in the beginning, feel free to type in questions into the chat. We'll take those as they come in. We do have time at the end here too for questions as well, but we're always happy to answer those questions. Jamie, we wrote the book in 3 different parts. Do you want to describe those parts and why we wrote the book in the way that we did?
Yeah, it was very intentional because we knew, and having been culture junkies, we've read a lot of culture books. And there was a lot of books out there that, first off, were just like great. And I felt inspired, but there was nothing that, okay, now what do I do? And how do I inspire someone else that I need to convince in my organization to be able to do that? And so we purposely wrote this in 3 parts. Part 1 is, why should I care? And we really wrote that with the idea of, you might be an evangelist of culture in your organization, but you might need to hand this book to somebody that doesn't really understand it and isn't there yet. And so we want that, like, here's all the data. I mean, you guys, we have so much data supporting why you should care about this. We had an entire sections throughout the book called data detours, where we're just putting a ton of data in here to just continue to enhance and to really help business leaders, right? Understand that this isn't fluffy stuff that we're talking about. So that's section 1. Then part 2 is the model itself. So talking about the model, why you should care about all 20 building blocks of it. And we go into each model in depth. So we are trying to create an army of people that understand this, because there's only so many people we can help. And hopefully all of you are some of those people to say, I want you to understand all these different aspects of culture so that you can have these conversations with people in your organization, people in your network. And so we dive deep, we share a lot of stories that we've seen, right? And how some of these different aspects and building blocks have been profound. And then the last section of the book is, now what? So we've created, right? That I now know I need to care. You've told me about a model that can help me start to articulate this and start to talk to it. And then the third part is, now what? And so we couldn't just say, great, go off. We're glad we created Evangelists About Culture. We actually created tools, and we walk through the tools in the book. And the tools are also, get to that in a minute here, but we're going to talk through at least 3 of the primary tools that we've got about, we want you to take action. And this is our value from end to end. It always has been as a company, is that I don't want to just talk to you about something. I want you to know the next right thing to do. You might not know the last thing to do 3 years from now on how we figure this out, the next right step. And to really drive that action is the third part. And then we really see that second part, going back to section 2, as being a reference manual as you're trying to work through it, right? So you read it, and that's the space you're likely going to go back to over and over again to say, have we made improvement in communication? Let's talk about how they describe communication in the book and see if we would give ourselves a high rating on that.
And to your point, you had made a little earlier too, is that we've seen a book that is like this, that has a model It has action steps. It has tools. It's a how-to guide without being overly instructive is really what we were hoping to get, because culture is so specific to your organization, the people that are there and the leaders that are there. But yet the concepts, the components of all of it, they're all the same. What they look like in every company can be very different. And so there's not a one size fits all. And the work has to be done. We can't just say, here, implement this into your company. The work has to be done internally in order for it to be sustainable, for it to stick, for people to believe in it and really help promote it. We say you need culture champions in your organization. And in order to get that, you have to really work with people cross-functionally across the organization to help develop this culture and utilize these tools that we have in the book to help you get there.
And Chelsey, to your point about there not being another book out there. So Chelsey and I knew we were reading culture books, and we're like, before I built the model, I went to look for a model. Because why do I want to spend 3 years of my life building a model if there's one out there that works? And we could not find one. And so we built our own. And just a couple months ago, when we're going through all the marketing with the publisher, so it's a national publisher, and their brand and marketing people came back and they said, we just did our whole process around Amazon bestsellers and New York Times. They do all of this analysis to understand where our book would be positioned. And they said, are you aware there's no other culture book on the market in Amazon bestsellers in any category that has a model? And I was like, I actually wasn't. We went and looked for one, but I figured someone had to have written one right in that period of time. No one has a model for how leaders actually do this. And so it was very validating just a couple of months ago for us to be like, all right, like we created something that hopefully is different and it is ready for people who want to take action, not just for people who want to feel good about culture, but people who want to do something about it.
And we also didn't want it to be like this encyclopedia of here, it's going to take you 4 years to read through and understand this. Our intent was, this is a plane ride book. You should be able to read it on a continental US plane flight and get from start to finish pretty quickly, which kind of leads me to Jamie. Do you want to talk about how we would recommend reading the book and utilizing the book?
Yeah, I think as always, it's start to finish. But then once you get to the tools, and we'll talk about those in a moment, like having those tools with you. So almost checking out the tools in the back, having them as you're reading the book to start thinking through, because you're going to make notes on the scorecard, right? The culture scorecard as you're reading some of the data that we have in the first part of the book. So I think checking out either the website or kind of checking out the back of the book where we've got all the tools is the place to start. Have those with you, read the book from start to finish, and then use part 2, right, around the model as you're then going back to the tools to say, how do we start to create our scorecard? How do we start to think about the goals and the things that are on our culture map? Those types of things. So we want it also to be a reference manual of sorts, right? Where you can just go back to a certain part of it if that's the part your organization is struggling with or the part you're trying to figure out a goal or a plan for.
And then the intent would be to get this with other leaders in your organization, right? You can't do this all on your own. Like Jamie said earlier, this isn't HR's job to own this and do everything. This needs to be a group effort. So ideally, having the rest of the team read the book as well, so that we can all be using the same language. We're coming from the same understanding of what culture is, the way we think, act, and interact in our organization, what the building blocks are, and then start to evaluate that as a team. Where are we strong? Where are we weak? And then filling out these tools. Now let's jump into the tools. We're going to post these in the chat so you can pull these up. They're all PDFs, so you can just open them up and save them. But let's go through these, Jamie, and kind of how we design them and what our intent is with each of them, starting with the culture compass.
Yeah, so the 3 tools that we started with, and we really talked about in the book, we have a lot more tools, obviously, and we'll figure out as we go what other tools maybe we release right on the website. But we knew these 3 were the foundational tools that would help drive the conversation, as Chelsey said. So here's my advice. If you can't get someone to read the book, send them the tools. Because the tools are meant to be standalone, right? If someone didn't read the entire book, to just start the conversation, because that's the biggest piece. If we can just start having these conversations as leadership teams, in our own teams, even if the leaders above me want nothing to do with it, I have complete control with my team to start having these types of conversations. And that's really how we built the model, to say, this is division by division, department by department. You know, my background, some of you may know, is at Cargill. I don't believe you can do this work at corporate Cargill. I don't even think it's valuable to do this work. You can have values and you can have certain things, but divisionally, departmentally is where the magic actually is going to happen. And so that's why when we say it's culture's the leader's choice, is it needs to be down in each. So the first thing we start with is the culture compass. So back to the climbing theme, right? We wanted to say, this is where we're pointed, right? This is our direction and our vision for what we want our culture to be. And unlike some other things like values, this is actually aspirational. So there can be some things we're doing today, but we want you to come together as a team and say, here's the culture we want to create. Here's how we want it to feel. Here's how we want to promote it. And here's how we want to celebrate it. Right. So all of those aspects of culture, and having this conversation with your team will build more trust than you could ever do in other exercises, because this is the kind of conversations we aren't having in most organizations, right? We aren't engaging our staff and our team in these kinds of things. How do we want to start thinking and acting, right? What does that mean to us? And how would we describe it? And so you go through this culture compass, and the goal is, and it's got words and it's got prompts so that it's helping you if you get stuck at any point. But the goal is, as a team, you define a culture vision statement. This is what we want to be. And we provide examples in the book of culture vision statements. So you can get a sense, right? It's very different than a mission statement and a vision statement, because it's really about how we think, act, and interact. But it also then becomes, if the team is involved in this, this is how we said we're going to treat each other in good times and in bad times, right? And are we doing that? So it can be something that you can pull back out and really refer to, be a little bit of a rally cry, right, for your team, and to make them know that culture really does matter. Like, we're not just talking about it, like we're taking the time to put this vision together. And then from there, the next kind of tool is to create your culture map. So we have to know how we're going to get from here to there. And then from there to the next level, right? We're never done, but we want to help you in that kind of strategic planning rhythm, is to say, we also need to plan for our culture. We need to put this into what are those goals that we're going to put in. And we typically want you to stay right at an annual goal for culture. It can be, you can have the vision be out further than that, but goals we can't have the goals be too far out. Otherwise we get kind of lost in all of the different pieces of it. And we want you to be very succinct on, if we're setting, right, as you see some of the examples, to create our core values and integrate them into the business, that can be a goal. But how do we know we're done? How will we know that we were successful in that, and putting that success criteria right in here that we can hold ourselves accountable to say we either did it or we didn't. And then what we also have you do is tie it back to a building block, because what you'll start to realize is when you set really good goals, there might be 5 or 6 building blocks that goal will help with. And for some, it's going to be specific, a 1-to-1 ratio, but we want you to actually think through it and say, are we hitting enough of the building blocks in the goals that we're setting in this plan? And that's part 1. And then part 2 is to take it down to the quarterly. So very similar to an operating framework that you would use in your business. If we set goals at the annual level in January, we go right back into the business and think we got plenty of time to get that goal done. Well, you don't actually, because it goes so fast, right? And the business starts running you, that we want to set those 90-day kind of rhythm targets to say, if we want to be there with our culture at the end of the year, what do we have to do in the next 90 days so we know we're on the right track? And those 90-day goals and actions might shift as we go and we learn and we see what works and what doesn't work, but we're really trying to build accountability into each of these. And the other thing you'll see in all these tools is we've created some expert tips on each of them. And those will be things we'll continue to refine and probably continue to add to, but we're really trying to make this self-service so that you guys can do this yourselves, right, with your organizations. And you call somebody like us just when you're stuck or when it gets to the more complicated things, right, which is where we have our specialty. And then the last tool is the impact scorecard. So we purposely made this a foundational tool for this reason, because the number one thing we heard when we launched our model and we were talking to business leaders is you can't measure culture. We heard it over and over. In fact, we at one point we were going to make t-shirts because we heard it so many times. And the answer actually is, I agree with them when we're looking at culture as being this big nebulous thing. But when you get to our model, we built it because every single one of those building blocks can be measured. Now, some of them are indirect measurables and some of them are direct. but that doesn't mean it can't be measured. And so through the culture scorecard, we want to really break the mold of how you're thinking about measuring culture. I want to see operational efficiency metrics on your culture scorecard, not just HR metrics around turnover. Those are great too. We need to know those, but I want to see financial performance metrics, right? So of course we can't say it was all the culture work we did that drove all of our financials. But when we start to see all these metrics moving in the right direction, it's the analogy I'll give is it's like weight loss, right? If I don't see the scale moving ever, am I going to continue what I'm trying to do? But when we start to see some of these metrics start to turn and to look healthier, do we care where it came from? Do I care if my weight loss came from working out a little bit more or eating? I don't care. I care that I lost another pound. And so that's exactly what we want this scorecard to do, is whether or not we can tie it directly, we want you to create a robust culture scorecard that tells a story about the progress you're making. And also tells you if some of the goals you picked aren't moving the needle, then that's also information that you need to know. And so that culture scorecard, we're really trying to have you break the kind of normal tendencies to just measure the things that are direct correlation, and let's start measuring the indirect things and see how those change and evolve.
Yeah.
Anything else you would add to that, Chelsey?
No, I think you went over them very thoroughly. I would just love to just pose this back to the group is, do you have any questions on these tools now that you've seen them and heard Jaime talk about them a little bit? Is there any questions on how you'd utilize them or why we created them, or even just what you're most excited about, or which one of these tools you're most excited about? And again, you can feel free to unmute and chat or go ahead and type it into the chat. Because again, this is what's going to help move culture forward. We have to do the work. This is the work. These are the tools that are going to help you get to that next level and start your climb. And so we really want to make sure that people understand what these tools are. And if you find them overly complicated or you don't understand them, we would love to know that now. So we can make some updates real quick on the website before the book launches next week.
But where do you think organizations get stuck? Yeah, Matt.
Yeah, I can just imagine a scenario where we have metrics in our leadership team that we go over every week. Where does the culture scorecard sit in relation to that scorecard?
Chelsey, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I would say most of our culture metrics are not going to be weekly metrics. You might have one or two that are, and if you have any weekly metrics, I'd add them right onto your other scorecard that you're looking at on a weekly basis. Otherwise, I would say most of the metrics with culture seem to be monthly. And so then I would have a monthly review of those metrics. Most companies are having some sort of a monthly financial overview, looking back over the last month of your P&L and whatever, added into that, right? Business needs, human needs, looking at them at the same time. That's the whole purpose of what we're talking about. So that's how I would address it. And then every year when you're doing your annual planning, you're going to set business goals. Let's make sure we have some human goals and metrics that are tied to that as well.
Great question.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah. Anything else around the tools?
Okay, so I think the last piece we have, and then we'll open it up for just broad Q&A or comments or things you've seen work, because I love just sharing stories with each other too, is we want to kind of let you guys know what's coming next too, right? With the book launch has been the big push for our team next week. I can't believe it's here next week already, but we are also adding a couple of other things in here that just we wanted everybody to know about. So we have, based on conversations with leaders that are like, maybe we don't need you yet to do the full model that we do, but we need a little bit more help than the tools, right? Maybe some facilitation or to come in and just help us work through these tools just a little bit. We're creating what we're calling coaching bundles. So Culture Climb coaching bundles. That is, you get some hours, right, with an advisor and someone who's super smart on culture to work through those tools with you, right? And to help you create that roadmap. So it's going to get you further faster. So there'll be more information in the coming month or so and weeks coming out about that. We also formed Culture Climb roundtables. So we kicked off our first one, or we're kicking off our first one actually this week, and we're planning to fill more of these. So these are 8 to 10 leaders that are coming together in a peer forum, but to really focus on building their culture muscle, right? So they want to come together and they want to share best practices. We will be bringing in our tools in more depth. So that's also a way to work through these and to really understand them for your own organization. We always have coaching around this. So the executive coaching and to be able to help you and your leadership team with all of that. And then the other piece that we've been doing for a long time, we're just starting to get better at talking about it, is our conscious culture leadership series. So we have a 3-part for that base in our model, right? Because we know that's the most important piece. And we're going to be doing a lot more, hopefully adding some public courses as well. So if an organization doesn't want to do it, their leaders can still join publicly this year, but really talking about leading self, leading others, and leading culture, because all 3 are important. And so that's what our Conscious Leader series goes through. So if anybody has any questions on that, we can talk to you offline. You can find information on our website and things like that. But we're really trying to drive other ways for people to interact with the book and to interact with culture and getting better without it having to be like this huge thing. Like, how's a way we can step towards it? Oh, thank you, Sarah, for sharing that too.
Yeah, and we have some information collateral on all 3 of those as well. So I think we'll send a follow-up email to this group and just with some more information. So if you want to use it or share it with a friend, we would love that. I just want to touch back on the roundtables quickly. So the intent of that is it's half educational. What is culture? What is leadership? Utilizing the tools, really digging into the educational learning side of it, and then half peer group. How are you utilizing this? What issues are you having? How are you solving for that? So it's really kind of the best of both worlds. It's only 90 minutes a month, so it's not a big time commitment. And it's just with other leaders that are in similar situations in life and leading teams or leading companies and working through that. What does it mean to be a leader? What does it mean to lead culture? And where do I need to start with my team to help get to that next level? So we're really excited about those for sure.
And then just to let all of, because you joined this and is that people who buy the book, even between now and then in August, we're going to have a Q&A session. You've now got the tools, you've read the book, you can invite other members of your team, and we're going to have conversations around mastery, around these tools. Where are you hitting roadblocks in your organization? So we'll make sure you get the details on that, but Chelsey and I are going to do a Q&A and another event like this in August, so that we make sure people are taking action and we're not getting stuck at any point of the process.
We just had a couple of last minute follow-up items we would like to share. One, Jamie already mentioned, in August, we're doing the Q&A session. So you'll have the book, hopefully read through it, utilizing some of the tools, great opportunity for us to re-engage and just to ask any other questions that might come up, or like Jamie said, where you're stuck, we can help get you to the next level there. And the other thing that we have a really big ask around is if you could, after you read the book, if you can post something on social, leave a review on Amazon, it would help us tremendously. I know, Jamie, do you want to talk to the value of reviews on Amazon?
Oh, you guys, being an author it's all about the Amazon sales and the reviews. It just gets more eyeballs on your book. And if any of you have written a book, you do not write a book to make money. Literally do not write a book to make money. You write a book to get the impact of whatever you're saying in the book out there. And so it's such a big deal to us to just have those reviews. And it keeps us going too, right? When we're going through this launch process and the 2 years of work that we put in. So yeah, that would be the biggest thing for us, is having that support.
Yes, we would really appreciate that. And I just think what we're hoping to have you take away from this conversation is that there's tools. It doesn't have to be overly complicated, right? Our whole goal is help you take your first next step, whatever that might be. Reading the book might be your first next step, right? And then after that, it's maybe utilizing 1 or 2 of the tools, sharing it with some of your other team members and leadership team, and just start having more conversations around what is culture in our organization? Where are we strong? Where do we need to make some improvements? And just how do we get started? We don't have to have it all figured out, because that's where people get that inertia of a blank page, right? It's like, oh my gosh, there's so much to do. Like, how do we ever, don't worry about that. What's our first next step? So that's my intent, and what my hope is for you for attending this session, reading the book, is just, how do you get started? What's that first next thing you need to do? Jamie, anything else to add?
The only thing I would add is just really planting a seed, and I'm not giving any time frames, but hopefully by the end of the year, we want to have Culture Climb Guide certification, where people who are passionate about this work, whether they're in an organization where they could do it for the organization, or they're consultants and work with clients and love this, we're going to have a way for you to get certified in this. So that's something also to just be aware of, because Chelsey and I, we're not planning to build a team big enough, right, to do this for every company that needs it. And so we want to be able to build guides across the globe, right, that can do this work and use the model and do it themselves. So just planting that seed that's also coming. So just pay attention. It'll be later in the year, but we'll be releasing information on that as well.
And then Sarah posted one last thing into the chat there, which is the website for the Culture Climb book. So that's where all the updated information will be. The tools are all there. You can order the book from there, which I know you all have, but if you want to send anyone else there.
And if you're going to post, that's the easiest place to post too, because then people can choose Amazon or Barnes and Noble. We have all the links there. So that's just a great place to send people to if people are curious.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for pre-ordering the book. Thank you for attending this conversation. And like we said, we just hope that you're taking some value out of this and are motivated and inspired to take your first next steps with your culture. And as always, we're here to help. So if you have questions, you get stuck along the way, that's what we're here for. We'll be sending a follow-up email with the different options of how to utilize us if you want to, if we're involved in your next steps. We'd love to just have a conversation around that too and help you out.
Thank you so much, you guys.
All right.
You.
Have a great rest of your week.